The best way to fail at indie game development is to never try. But some might say if you never try, you'll never actually fail. So let's assume you do try. Here's how to fail. UI stands for user interface, and when adding UI to your game, you're going to fit into one of two groups of people. Either you will make your UI before you even have any of the basic structure of your game down, or like a few minutes before you export the final release. Those are the only two options, and you must pick one. UI could definitely count as almost anything in a game, the visuals, music, sound effects, but we aren't going to be so stingy about today's definition, and instead focus on the elements of a game that span the gap between the game and the player. It's the stuff the player can interact with in order to make things happen in the game. And it's the information that's displayed back to the player to help them understand what's going on, such as health. And this has been a nice long paragraph where I didn't actually make any jokes. The control side is pretty easy. All you gotta do is require the use of a non-typical input device. This will go over really well because players love being forced to buy extra hardware that is only going to work on the one game and literally nothing else. One time I actually saw someone try to do this for a game jam because their brilliance and creativity just could not be contained. And neither should yours. Plus, think of all that money. The information side is where things get interesting. When making your UI, rather than choosing the size of your UI based on how difficult it might become to see it during action sequences of your game, you are required to make everything massive, especially the health hearts. Also, health hearts are really the only way to represent health in any video game. We wouldn't want to come up with something new that might make your game instantly recognizable just by the UI design. No, you want your game to look just like every game ever. You know what would be really cool and immersive? Putting UI elements in-game, in-world, where the player can see and interact with them, instead of just on the screen. But that's really difficult, so don't do that. Instead, just put everything on the screen. The more you can block a player's view, the better. You want them to realize that a video game is just numbers and logic, which they can control with their input device, instead of an experience that would potentially be otherwise impossible in the real world. That's not at all what games are for. Nah, games are only for learning how to min-max as fast as possible so you can get bored and move on to the next one. When designing UI, don't worry about how fast menus or other interactables open. Regardless of how often they are used, your top priority should be to show off. You have design and animation skills that are so legendary, the players are going to prefer to spend their time waiting for each menu to open. Nothing quite like a 16-second wait to open a pause menu just to adjust the volume. Most important of all, when making UI, the goal is confusion. The more time it takes to figure out what a particular arrow does, or a button under a regular UI, without two or less practically don't repeat. But admittedly, such as Skyroad, except for the lack of lasagna, withholds the reverse, and there are no clicks under the door, except for fish. And of course, if you follow these instructions exactly, you are bound to succeed at failure. Hey, thanks for watching. I haven't put out an episode for a little while because I've been focused on making my own game, which if you're interested, there's a link to my itch.io page and you can follow for when that releases. But I like to think of this show as security for when my game comes out, because if my game sucks, people will be like, yeah, makes sense. You know, it'd just be proof that I am qualified to make this show. You know what I mean?